Hey, hey guys, so we posted this video yesterday, which everyone was covering, of Chuck Schumer sitting on the steps of the Supreme Court, openly and unapologetically threatening by name two Supreme Court Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. And in Democrat fashion, not only did he not apologize, but he's blamed Republicans for putting him in the position to say those things. He's also trying to shift his words around and claim that even though he said, "I say to you, Kavanaugh, I say to you, Gorsuch," he's trying to claim now that he was talking symbolically about all Republicans, and that when he said that these Supreme Court justices would pay the price, that he really meant that Senate Republicans would pay the price. It's honestly, these types of mental gymnastics give me whiplash just trying to keep track of them all. But this was his floor speech, and it is a masterful example of trying to push off the criticism and deflect it to Republicans. So we're going to listen to this, and then we're going to respond to some of the BS arguments that he makes. Let's listen.
We're not.
Thank you, Madam President. Now, Madam President, I just listened to the Republican leader, and there was a glaring omission in his speech. He did not mention what the rally yesterday, my speech, or the case before the court was about: a woman's constitutional right to choose.
You know, why does that matter?
To the women of America, what we're talking about
we're gonna pause this. So he's saying that instead, he's just been credibly accused of basically threatening the two Supreme Court justices, not one but two. That's a federal crime that carries a 5-year prison sentence per instance, right? So he was credibly accused, because we all saw it on video, him threatening, saying that they would have a price to pay if they didn't rule the way he wanted them to. So here we go. This is his first opportunity to publicly respond on his own. And instead of actually apologizing, the first words out of his mouth were to say that the Republicans are trying to hide something from the American people, that the Republicans aren't going to say what this whole debate is actually about. So let's just clear that air. That protest at the Supreme Court was over a Louisiana law that was signed into law by a Democrat president. Throughout this whole speech, you'll hear Chuck Schumer blame Republicans. The law that the Supreme Court is considering was signed into law by a Democrat in Louisiana. Chuck Schumer claims that Republicans are coming after the right to choose. But what this law says is that if you're an abortionist, if you're an abortion doctor in the state of Louisiana, and you want to practice medicine, you need to meet certain standards in order to remain licensed. And one of those standards was that you had to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. The law says a hospital within 30 miles of your clinic. Democrats claim that that is bogus. That's just an attempt to close down the clinics. Republicans claim that it's completely reasonable for the licensing boards and the state to require that doctors practicing medicine and having conducting life-threatening procedures in their clinics have admitting privileges. So if one of their patients has complications and needs to go to the hospital, they can accompany the patient and admit them themselves. So with that said, let's listen to his propaganda.
What I am fighting for here is your right to choose.
No, it's bogus. I just explained
An
it.
issue, of course, Leader McConnell completely ignored in his speech.
Yeah, because we're talking about you threatening
I feel so
Supreme Court
passionately about this issue. And I feel so deeply the anger of women all across America.
So angry.
About Senate Republicans in the courts.
Completely scripted.
Working hand in glove to take down Roe v. Wade. I just read about a woman in Shreveport who, under the Louisiana law, now before the Supreme Court, would have to travel over 300 miles.
Okay, so let's pull this apart real quick. What he's talking about is in Louisiana, I believe Louisiana only has 4 abortion clinics. I might be wrong, but there are barely any abortion clinics in Louisiana. What he is explaining is that there is one clinic, at least one clinic, that claims they cannot find a doctor who qualifies for admitting privileges, and the doctors that they have are basically slow walking it. They refuse to actually try to get admitting privileges so that they could use their inability to do it as an excuse to get the law thrown out. So when he says that someone would have to travel 300 miles for an abortion, that is contingent on the clinic in question not finding a doctor or not being able to get one of their doctors admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. So there's a lot of ifs there. And right now, the reason that clinic hasn't complied with the law is because they don't want to comply with the law. And they're slow walking their compliance to be able to use that as an excuse for not complying. So this whole thing is bogus. And the sob story that he's telling, since he's doing this to Republicans, let's do it right back to Chuck Schumer. You'll notice that Chuck Schumer isn't telling the story of the young woman who prompted this legislation in the first place, who suffered complications at an abortion clinic. And her family went to Republicans in the Louisiana State House and pressured them to increase the regulations so that abortion clinics would have to have doctors with admitting privileges, so that other families, if people had complications from abortion procedures, their families wouldn't have to suffer the way that they did. So it's quite telling that Schumer is picking and choosing what kind of stories he wants to tell. He wants to basically paint this as that there's no reason for it, but there are actual human tragedies that prompted this law even to be introduced. Let's keep going.
To exercise our constitutional freedoms. And this is happening in states across the country.
I'm sure.
Republican state legislatures are restricting a woman's right to choose so severely as to make it non-existent.
Yeah. So okay,
and
let's challenge this. So, saying that doctors need to have admitting privileges in order to be licensed in the state is not eliminating the right to choose. It's telling doctors that if you want to practice medicine in the state, you have to shape up, right? He's talking about all around the country. Texas had a similar law, and one of the provisions in their law required that abortion clinics, if they want to operate, since these procedures can be life-threatening, not only would their doctors need to have admitting privileges, but the Texas law, if I remember this correctly, required that the clinics have hallways that are wide enough for an emergency gurney to be able to roll through it, right? Basically, you need to have hospital with hallways, which makes complete sense. If you need to take someone out of there on a stretcher or on a gurney, you want to be able to have a hallway wide enough to make the turns to get out of the building. Those were regulations for urgent care facilities and hospitals, and Texas tried to apply those same regulations to abortion clinics. So when you say that all around the country they're trying to eliminate a woman's right to choose, yes, there are activists, and I am one of them, who believe that Roe was terrible law. Roe versus Wade is a terrible decision. The idea that an unborn baby is akin to, a wart, and that women have the right to privacy so they can kill an unborn baby in private, I don't buy that. And there are plenty of people who agree with me. But what he's actually complaining about isn't that. It's trying to increase licensing requirements and regulations on abortion clinics. So whenever you hear Democrats talk about abortion and Roe versus Wade, you hear them say that if Roe was abolished, people would still be going to Mexico to get abortions. They'd be going to back alleys, using coat hangers, right? They present Roe v. Wade as important because otherwise people would still be getting abortions, but they'd be doing it in an unhealthy way. But then when you see state legislatures like in Louisiana try to make the health standards higher, Democrats completely flip. Instead of it being about healthy access and safe abortions, you hear them criticize the new standards as being violative of the right to choose. So they talk out of both sides of their mouth. They say it's about making sure that they maintain access to healthy abortions, but also criticize the increased medical standards. Let's keep listening.
Courts are now likely to go along because Senate Republicans have confirmed nominees they believe will strip away a women's rights and fundamentally change this country, going so far as to deny a duly elected president the right to pick a Supreme Court
Notice
justice.
how you haven't heard him apologize yet.
Republicans are afraid here in the Senate
This is all supposed to
to
be him
confront this
apologizing.
issue directly.
He hasn't actually
So they try
apologized
to
yet.
accomplish through the courts what they'd never accomplish in the court of public opinion. And they leave women out in the cold.
Okay, so no one's leaving women out in the cold. First of all, I don't even know what that means in this scenario, but it's really fresh that Democrats are accusing Republicans of using the courts to get what they cannot get on their own. That's something that Democrats have spent decades doing themselves. When they can't get gun control through, they turn to activist judges to do it for them. When Barack Obama couldn't get his environmental agenda through Congress, he turned to the United Nations and signed on to the Paris Climate Agreement without the advice and consent of the United States Senate, which is what the Constitution requires for a treaty, right? Democrats do this. When Democrats don't get their way, and they know they can't get their way, they use the courts, they use the United Nations, international organizations, and they use the executive branch to push their agenda through anyway. So it's quite fresh that he is now accusing, that he's crying over the fact that Republicans are doing it as well. You got to call out the hypocrisy when you see it.
So yes, I am angry. The women of America are angry.
He's so angry.
And yes, we will continue to fight for a woman's right to choose.
Yeah.
I will continue to fight
Notice he hasn't
for the
apologized.
women of America.
He still hasn't apologized.
Now, I should not have used the words
Oh,
I
here it
used
comes.
yesterday.
Okay.
They didn't come out the way I intended to.
Okay.
My point was that there would be political consequences
Yeah.
for President Trump and Senate Republicans.
Okay. That's BS. He said in his remarks, he called out by name Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. He in his remarks, I don't want to misquote him because then we'll get fact checked by some random CNN troll on the internet. But he name dropped them and he asked them to listen to him because he said he was speaking to them directly. He said that there would be a price to pay. The Supreme Court is not a political body. Supreme Court justices do not have to stand for re-election, right? You cannot say that when he was threatening Supreme Court justices by name, he actually meant to threaten his own colleagues, as if that's better, but not with violence, but with political consequences. He actually mentioned Trump. Yeah, no, don't buy it. Just say you're sorry. Just let's apologize and get over it.
If the Supreme Court, with the newly confirmed justices, stripped away a woman's right to choose, of course I didn't intend to suggest anything other than political and public opinion consequences for the Supreme Court.
Okay, so this is so fresh. This is amazing. So he's threatening Supreme Court justices by name, and now he says that what he really meant was when he said that there would be a price to pay, they would pay the price. What he meant was that there would be opinion polls that would not look kindly on them. Does anyone believe this? Does anyone buy this? Just say you're sorry, dude. You got heated. You said things you didn't mean to. Stop blaming Republicans. Stop trying to read between your own lines and say you meant to say something else. Just apologize.
And it is a gross distortion to
not.
imply otherwise.
It's not.
I'm from Brooklyn.
Which is why it's not a gross
Speak in
distortion.
strong language.
Not
I
a
shouldn't
distortion.
have used the words I did, but in no way was I making a threat.
Okay, so when you apologize and you want your apology to actually matter, never use the word but. So he just said, I'm sorry for the language I used, but no, just apologize. Put it behind you. What you said was horrible. Apologize. Say it won't happen again. And let's move on. Stop trying to say it's everyone else's fault.
I never would do such a thing. And Leader McConnell knows that. And Republicans who are busy manufacturing outrage over these comments know that too.
Okay, so Republicans, when they heard it were outraged. But this blew up as a story because Chief Justice John Roberts issued a statement condemning Schumer. Again, this isn't really Republican-led. Yeah, Republicans say that this is horrible, but the whole reason that this story became what it is is because the Supreme Court heard his same statements. The Chief Justice heard his same statements and interpreted them to mean threats, to be threats. The Chief Justice heard him call out two other justices by name and say they'll pay the price, and he interpreted that as a threat. So don't sit here and tell us that this is a Republican conspiracy. Again, you did it. It was wrong. Apologize.
Now, what will remain long after the clamor over my comments dies down is the issue at hand.
The issue at hand.
A woman's constitutional right to choose and Republican attempts to invalidate it.
Okay, again, this law that is at the center of this whole protest he was at is over medical licensing requirements. That doctors have to have admitting privileges at a local hospital if they want to perform these kinds of procedures in their own clinics. That is a very common requirement across the country for medical specialists performing dangerous procedures in their own clinics. It is common, right? This is the only thing that the only effect that this has on a women's right to choose is that it eliminates the women's right to choose a crappy doctor. It eliminates a woman's right to choose an abortion clinic that doesn't meet the proper standards, right? There are, I really think there's 4 clinics in Louisiana. We're talking about 4 clinics where they just need to get admitting privileges at a hospital. This isn't hard if they're qualified. It isn't hard. And to say that women should have to enjoy substandard care, I don't see how he thinks that this is a winning argument. I don't.
The fact that my Republican colleagues have worked systematically over the course of decades
it's a system.
to install the judicial infrastructure to take down Roe v. Wade and do very real damage to the country and to the American way of life.
All right, so this is pretty much the end. But that one statement that by trying to push these regulations, these laws through, that you're doing damage to the American way of life. Let that sink in. The American way of life. It's the American way of life to have an abortion at a clinic that doesn't meet state medical licensing provisions. It's the American way of life to have a dangerous abortion. It's the American way of life to have abortion doctors performing these procedures without the proper admitting privileges, so that if a patient has complications and needs to be rushed to the hospital, there's all this red tape and bureaucratic nonsense that has to happen to get her admitted. No, that's not the American way of life. This is what I'm talking about. He's taking a very simple issue and he's expanding it to be this all-encompassing, systematic assault on the American way of life. If any of this sounds like the American way of life, I don't know. I don't know what America you're talking about. Let's listen to the last couple seconds.
That is the issue that will remain. And I owe an obligation to the women of America to fight for their constitutional rights.
Oh my God. If only he showed this kind of emotion for literally any other constitutional rights. If he showed this kind of emotion towards, I don't know, violation of the First Amendment at public universities where they're violating people's right to free speech. The Second Amendment, which he openly calls to be violated, right? You're talking about the Fifth Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. You're talking about people's rights. He wants to reauthorize FISA. Where's that fall? How does he care about the Constitution and want to reauthorize FISA with a clean as-is bill, right? You look at the right to a speedy trial and the right to confront your accusers, and he was out front saying that Donald Trump had no right to confront his accusers. This guy doesn't believe in the Constitution, and you know that, but you got to call people out on this. When he says he's going to continue fighting for constitutional rights, and then every other time that a constitutional right comes under attack, he's either the one doing the attacking or is nowhere to be found. No, he's not real. This is not real activism. This is not real outrage. Someone wrote a script and he's pretending to be angry. What you saw in the video of him at the Supreme Court, that was him angry. that was him actually angry, which he had to get pretty angry to openly threaten a Supreme Court justice.
I yield the floor.
And he yields the floor. So yeah, we're going to do some more of these. Let us know if you like this kind of content where we go through the actual raw footage, because these types of speeches rarely make it onto the news. Every day there are speeches like this, but they never really get covered. But they're full of gems, as you saw with Chuck Schumer. They're full of lies. They're full of falsehoods, like half truths, and some of it's just completely BS. So let us know if you like this kind of content and you want to see more of this, more of these kind of reaction videos to floor speeches and things that maybe the media isn't covering, and we'll do it because I think this is fun. And listen, C-SPAN 2, at least it's not C-SPAN 3, right? But there's a lot of important stuff that happens on these kinds of channels, and just because the mainstream media doesn't pick it up doesn't mean that it's unimportant. So yeah, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications, and yeah, make sure you comment and let us know what you think of all of this.